Still looking for a way in. The cabin on Echo Ridge, the Lewis family had been desperate for a break. Dan had been working long hours at the office. Maria was juggling freelance projects and the constant needs of their two kids, Ava, 9, and Tommy, 6. When Dan suggested a weekend getaway to a remote cabin on Echo Ridge, a place he'd found online through a nature rental site, Maria hesitated. No internet, no neighbors, no nearby help. But Dan convinced her with promises of peace, simplicity, and family time. "It'll be good for all of us," he said. "No screens. Just us and nature." The drive up the mountain was long and winding, with stretches of gravel roads and thickening forest. By the time they reached the clearing where the cabin stood, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the trees. The cabin itself looked rustic but charming. A wrap-around porch, firewood stacked beside the door, and a faint scent of pine in the air. Inside, it was old but well-kept wooden floors, vintage furniture, and a fireplace that crackled to life once Dan got it going. There was no television, no Wi-Fi, and their cell phones had no reception. It was exactly what Dan promised. The first day passed quietly. They played board games, roasted marshmallows, and told stories by the fire. The silence of the forest was deeper than they were used to, almost oppressive, but they chalked it up to being away from city noise. That night, the family fell asleep, bundled under thick blankets, soothed by the distant howl of wind through trees. On the second night, just after they'd tucked the kids in, Ava called out from her room. "There's someone knocking on my window," she whispered, frightened. Dan exchanged a quick glance with Maria. He grabbed the flashlight and went outside. Circling the cabin, nothing, just trees, fog, and silence. He laughed it off, assuring Ava it was probably an animal or tree branch tapping the glass. She seemed unconvinced but nodded. The next morning, while fetching firewood, Dan noticed something strange in the mud beside the porch footprints. Bare. Large and deep, much too deep for a child. He stared at them, then called Maria out. "You think someone was messing around out here?" Maria's eyes narrowed. "It hasn't rained. These are fresh." Dan shrugged it off. Probably hikers. Maybe some drunk campers. But something had shifted. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and fog rolled in thick, the atmosphere in the cabin grew tense. The kids were unusually quiet. Tommy clung to Maria. Ava kept glancing toward the window. When they settled in for the night, Dan placed a heavy log against the front door and locked every window. Around 2 a.m., the knocking started again. But not just on Ava's window, on every window. It was soft, methodical, like fingertips brushing the glass, then harder, fists, one after another. Dan jumped from bed and grabbed the flashlight again, throwing on his coat. Maria shouted, "Don't go out there." But he did. He aimed the beam into the fog, saw nothing, but felt eyes on him. The knocking stopped. Total silence returned, thick and unnatural. Inside, Maria was calming Tommy, who was crying hysterically. Then Ava screamed. They sprinted up the stairs. Her room was empty. The window was open. The curtain swayed in the breeze. Her blanket lay in a heap on the floor, still warm. No broken glass, no sign of struggle. They called her name for hours. They ran into the woods with flashlights, shouting into the darkness. The only sound was the crunch of leaves and their own panicked breathing. When dawn broke, they called the authorities on Dan's emergency satellite phone. By noon, the search had begun. Drones, dogs, volunteers, nothing. No sign of Ava. Maria refused to leave the cabin, certain Ava would come back. Dan stayed too, hollow-eyed, haunted. A week passed. Then the search was called off. The last photo taken from a wildlife camera, recovered from the ridge trail, surfaced in the investigation. It showed a figure tall, distorted, almost human, its face blurred by motion or something more unnatural. In its arm, it cradled what looked like a child's backpack. Next to it stood a pale girl, barefoot, her eyes sunken and blank, her hair matted. She was staring straight at the camera. It was Ava. The case was closed. Authorities called it an abduction, but offered no suspects, no leads. Dan and Maria returned home, shattered. Tommy didn't speak for months. He finally told Maria, in a whisper, it was the man from the trees. He came back for her. Maria froze. You saw him? Tommy nodded slowly. He told me not to tell. He said, if I do, he'll come back for me too. Dan never forgave himself. Every weekend since, he drives up to the ridge and leaves small offerings. Ava's favorite stuffed animal, her favorite snack, notes begging for her return. One morning, he found her hairband tied to a branch above the trail. Clean, untouched. By weather. It hadn't been there the night before. Some say the man from the ridge is older than the forest. Something ancient and forgotten. Something that waits for children in quiet places. And if you listen, just before sunrise, when the fog is thick and the trees are still, you can hear the knocking. Highway 13 motel. The Carsons had been on the road for nearly 7 hours when the left rear tire blew. The sun was beginning to set, and they were deep into rural territory. Long stretches of road, bordered by nothing but scrubland and distant trees. Dan pulled over, muttering under his breath, and inspected the damage while Ellie tried to keep 6-year-old Sophie entertained in the back seat. With no cell signal and no town in sight, they spotted a weathered sign just off the road. Highway 13 Motel, vacancy. The motel looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. The flickering neon sign buzzed in the fading light. There were 5 or 6 other cars in the parking lot, but no sign of life behind any of the curtain-covered windows. The air was still hot and heavy. Inside the lobby, the light overhead flickered. A woman with stringy gray hair and a cigarette dangling from her lips sat behind the desk. Her eyes were cloudy, her voice like gravel scraped across asphalt. One room? She asked without looking up. Dan nodded, trying to stay polite. Just for the night. Got a flat. She handed over an old brass key with the number 7 etched into a plastic tag. Don't open the door after dark, she said flatly, as if reciting a rule she didn't care about. The room was small, stale, and dim. The air conditioner rattled loudly but barely cooled the room. The smell of mold was immediate, but beneath it was something metallic and sharp. Blood, maybe. Ellie tried to ignore it, tucking Sophie into one of the beds with her favorite blanket while Dan messed with the TV. Static. They went to sleep uneasy. Around 1:13 a.m., Ellie's eyes snapped open. There were footsteps. Slow, dragging, like someone injured or someone unwilling. They grew louder, then stopped right outside their door. Her breath caught. She gently woke Dan. He grudgingly sat up and whispered, probably another guest. But the footsteps didn't continue. They just stayed. Then came a knock, slow, dull, almost like a head tapping the door instead of a fist. Knock. Tiptoed to the door and peeked through the peephole. Nothing, but he didn't open it. Minutes passed. The air in the room grew cold. Sophie stirred, whimpered, then fell back asleep. The knocking eventually stopped. In the morning, the hallway was empty. The cars in the lot were gone. Every single one. At the front desk, Ellie asked the woman, did someone knock on our door last night? We heard. Don't open the door at night, the woman said again, lighting another cigarette. They remember when you do. Dan didn't say a word. He just grabbed the key and tossed it onto the desk. They packed fast. As they approached the car, Ellie stopped in her tracks. A small folded note was wedged under their windshield wiper. In smeared black ink, it read, "We liked your daughter's laugh. Bring her back." Ellie's blood ran cold. She slowly turned to look at Sophie, who was already buckled in the back seat, humming to herself. Then she saw it, smears, greasy, wet smudges on the outside of Sophie's window. As if someone or something had been licking the glass, they drove in silence. No one spoke, not for hours. The roads stretched endlessly ahead, but no one dared look in the rearview mirror. Later that night, as they checked into a different hotel in a town 2 hours away, Ellie took Sophie to the bathroom. As she helped her wash her hands, she noticed something odd under Sophie's collar was a small handprint. Pale, smudged, like ash. Sophie looked up at her mother and whispered, "They said I was funny. They told me stories through the window." "What stories, honey?" Sophie paused. Then she smiled. "How they're going to take you next." Dan never turned the car off again. For days they drove aimlessly, never stopping for more than a few hours. Sophie began to change quieter, sometimes humming tuneless songs, always watching out the window. At night, once, Ellie caught her whispering to the trees as they passed by. Back home, the Carsons found a package waiting for them with no return address. Inside was a small cassette tape. Dan played it, curious. It was static for the first few seconds, then the sound of footsteps. Then Sophie's laugh. Then a dozen voices laughing with her. Then one voice whispering, "Next time, open the door." Ellie destroyed the tape, but it didn't matter. Every night at 1:13 a.m., the knocking started again. Only now it was inside the house. The trail behind the falls, the Martins, David, Aaron, teenage daughter Lily, and 8-year-old Sam had always been the kind of family that cherished road trips, photo albums, and national parks. Red Hollow National Park was their summer destination. This year, tucked away in the mountains with scenic drives, pristine waterfalls, and promises of adventure. They arrived on a Saturday morning, bright-eyed and full of energy. After checking into a nearby lodge and grabbing a park map, they drove to the Silver Drop Falls trailhead for what was supposed to be a short hike. A man near the ranger station, older and worn like the forest itself, mentioned something as they passed by. "There's a trail behind the falls," he rasped, squinting at Sam. "Not on the map. Only go if you want the mountain to remember you." David laughed it off. Aaron raised an eyebrow. Sam looked curious. But by the time they reached Silver Drop Falls, the roar of water had drowned out the memory of that warning until Lily noticed a narrow path hidden behind the curtain of falling water. It was faint but walkable, leading into thick, untouched forest. David hesitated. Aaron shrugged. "An adventure," she said. The trail was cooler, shaded by thick foliage. But the deeper they went, the quieter it got. Birds vanished. No buzzing insects. The air was still, almost stagnant. The trees bent inward, their branches arching like a ribcage. David tried to check the compass, but the needle spun in circles. GPS wouldn't load. An hour passed. Then 2. The path didn't loop or fork, it just continued, darker and narrower. They passed strange rock formations that looked arranged, stacked stones in spirals. Sam asked to go back. Lily was unusually silent. That's when they saw the first tree, with names carved deep into its bark. Hundreds of names, scratched frantically, layer over layer. Aaron bent down to examine one when David froze. One name stood out, Martin. Below it, the date. Today's date. His breath caught. Did one of us do this? But the carving was old, weathered, years deep. Panic rose quickly. Aaron insisted they turn around. But the path they'd come from was gone, overgrown with thorny brush and moss, as if no one had walked it in years. Lily began to cry. As dusk settled, the forest turned darker than it should have. They stumbled into a clearing, unnaturally round, too symmetrical. In the center, old tents lay collapsed. Ash-filled fire pits sat cold. And all around, dozens of shoes lay scattered, some children's, some adult. None paired. No footprints. Then the wind shifted. It began whispering, softly at first, like breath through trees. But the sound shaped itself into syllables then. Words. Their names. David. Aaron. Lily. Lily. They froze. That night, huddled around a cold pit with nothing but dim lantern light. They heard movement, footsteps, snapping branches, breathing. But whenever David shined the light, there was no one. At one point, Lily said she saw a figure standing between trees, tall and wide-eyed, just watching. The forest wouldn't let them sleep. They felt it shifting, breathing, circling them. By morning, only Sam made it back. A ranger found him walking barefoot down the road, trembling. His eyes were dull. His clothes were dirty and torn. When they asked what happened, he would only say, "They said I could go if I forgot their names." The Martins were never found. The trail behind Silverdrop Falls doesn't appear on maps. Rangers dismiss stories of disappearances as rumors, but hikers speak in hushed tones of wind that whispers names, of shoes in the forest, of voices offering deals. And if you find the trail behind the falls, turn back. If the mountain remembers you, you won't be leaving the same. The last ride up Mount Ellerith. Connolly family had always cherished the fall. Something about the changing leaves, the cool, crisp air, and the soft hush of the woods seemed to reset their lives each year. So when Ben suggested a trip to Vermont's lesser-known Mount Ellery for a quiet weekend, Amanda quickly agreed. Their teenage twins, Chloe and Jake, reluctantly put down their phones, lured by promises of cozy cabins and hot cocoa. The family piled into their SUV, unaware that their destination had a reputation whispered among locals, but never written down. Mount Ellery wasn't on many travel blogs. There were no Yelp reviews, no hashtags. It had a rickety old gondola ride that had apparently been running since the 1960s, and the base lodge looked like it hadn't been touched since then either. But that's what the Connollys wanted, an escape from the noise. They arrived late Friday morning. The parking lot was empty. Fog hugged the trees. The only sound was the creaking of the gondola wires above. An older man, thin and pale, with a limp that made his boots drag slightly on the concrete, manned the tiny ticket shack. His name tag read Walter. "You folks sure about heading up today?" he asked, eyes flicking toward the fog creeping down the slope. Ben gave a half chuckle. "That's why we came. Got the whole mountain to ourselves." Walter didn't smile. He slid a set of faded tickets across the counter. "You'll be the last ride up today. Nobody else coming. We shut down at 5. The gondola was old, but stable. It rocked gently as they stepped inside. The door clanked shut behind them, and with a lurch, they began to rise. The first part of the ride was uneventful. Trees, ablaze with orange and crimson, stretched far beneath them. Chloe snapped pictures while Jake leaned back, yawning. Amanda pointed out a hawk circling in the sky. Then halfway up, the gondola shuddered. The sudden jolt sent Chloe's phone skidding across the bench. "What was that?" Amanda asked, heart quickening. Ben pressed his face to the fogged glass. "Probably just a stall. These things happen." But it didn't start again. Minutes passed, then an hour. The radios mounted in the cabin crackled, but no voice came through. Phones had no bars. The fog grew thicker. Jake looked down. Is it just me, or does the forest look different now?" They all looked. The brilliant colors had faded. The trees were blackened, as if scorched. Many had no leaves. Some bent inward, unnaturally, like they were reaching toward the gondola. "This isn't the same mountain," Chloe whispered. Then came the sound-soft tapping on the outside of the glass. They turned. Nothing. Then again. Tap, tap, tap. Just behind Chloe's head. She shrieked, spinning to see, but the fog was so dense. They couldn't make out what was out there. Ben tried to open the radio again. Still static. Then they heard it. A scraping sound beneath the floor. Something was crawling along the metal underside of the car. The family huddled together. The fog shifted. revealing faint shapes, tall, thin figures standing between the trees. They were motionless, unblinking, their heads tilted slightly to the side. Amanda whispered, "Are they people?" But even as she asked, one of them moved, crawling up an invisible thread of fog toward the gondola. They screamed. The shape paused just beneath the cabin, and the entire car swayed, as if something large was hanging from its base. Then silence. No movement, no sound. They stayed that way until nightfall. When the sun finally rose, the gondola was at the station again. Only Chloe was inside, her knees drawn to her chest, her face pale, eyes wide, staring at nothing. She was covered in frost. When the Rangers found her, she wouldn't speak, only rocked back and forth. Finally, after hours, she whispered a single sentence. "It wasn't a mountain. It was watching us the whole time." The gondola has remained closed ever since. Locals don't talk about Mount Ellery, and no one asks what happened to Ben, Amanda, or Jake. But some nights, when the fog rolls down from the hills, people in the village below say they hear the faint creak of the gondola wires and tapping on their windows that comes from far above the ground. The lake never reflected the Reynolds family. Amanda, Greg, their daughter Lily, and 8-year-old Ethan needed a break. Life had been loud. Work, school, schedules, city traffic. Everything spun too fast. Amanda remembered the stillness of Blackwood County from her childhood, the lake where her grandparents had taken her once, decades ago. It was remote, quiet, and almost forgotten. A cabin had come up for rent at short notice. It felt like a sign. The drive there was smooth. The kids bickered in the back seat about snacks and playlists, but as soon as they pulled into the gravel driveway that led to the cabin, the noise seemed to fall away. The lake greeted them, perfectly oval, unnaturally still, framed by low hills and pines that curved like arms around it. The water mirrored the sky with such clarity, it was hard to tell where reflection ended and reality began. Their cabin was simple but comfortable. The scent of aged cedar clung to the walls. There were no neighbors, no boats, and no cell signal. It was as if the lake had pressed pause on the outside world. For the first time in months, Amanda felt her shoulders relax. On the second morning, Greg stood at the shore with a mug of coffee, watching the sun paint gold on the water. Amanda joined him, smiling until she noticed something that tightened her gut. "Do you see that?" she asked. Greg followed her gaze. The trees reflected, the hills, even the thin trail of mist that clung to the lake's surface. But not them. No shape stood at the shore in the water's mirror. "Probably just the angle," Greg muttered, shifting side to side. Amanda did the same. Nothing. Their figures didn't ripple, didn't appear. It was like the lake didn't register them. Lily joined them and paused mid-step. "Why can't I see us?" That night, Amanda brushed it off with excuses. Maybe they needed sleep. Maybe it was the lighting. The next day, the same thing happened. But this time, a park ranger visited an older woman named June who came to check permits and ensure fire safety. As they chatted, Amanda made a point to ask June to walk to the lake with them. When the ranger stepped beside them at the shore, Amanda's breath caught. June reflected, clear as day. The family did not. Amanda's heart thudded. She didn't say anything until the ranger left, but Greg had noticed too. Lily and Ethan were pale and quiet that night. No one brought it up over dinner, but the lake had noticed them. Later that night, Amanda woke to the creaking of wood. The cabin, old as it was, whispered when it settled. But this sound was rhythmic, soft footsteps across the dock. She slipped out of bed, heart fluttering, and peeked through the curtains. Ethan stood at the edge of the dock, speaking to something in the water. Amanda rushed out, calling his name. He turned to her calmly. His voice was flat, distant. "They're showing us what we are." She grabbed his arm and brought him inside. He didn't resist, but his eyes didn't blink much. He slept without another word. The next morning, Ethan was gone. The dock was dry. No ripples, no signs of struggle. Just a small, perfect handprint pressed into the wet wood beneath the dock. Greg called the ranger. June came, but her face changed when she saw the lake. She stood there in silence. Then she said something strange. Sometimes it remembers people. If it does, it keeps them. Greg asked if they should organize a search. June shook her head. It won't help if the lake has already chosen. Lily, now terrified, refused to go outside. That evening, Amanda stood at the edge of the water. This time, her reflection appeared, but it didn't match her movements. She waved it, DIDN single quotes T. She turned it. Stared. Amanda stumbled back, pulling Greg out with her. They watched in horror as their reflections grew slightly larger, clearer, and began moving on their own, mimicking gestures they hadn't made. Smiling when they weren't, Lily screamed. Her reflection was mouthing words silently, words they couldn't hear, but that she insisted were, "He's not gone." That night, they packed everything. Greg drove. Amanda held Lily close. But the road out twisted back, again and again, past the same pine tree with the broken branch. 3 times, finally, after hours, the trees parted and they found the highway. Silence followed for miles. They never saw Ethan again. Weeks later, Amanda received an envelope. No return address. Inside was a photo, an old black and white image of the lake. Barely visible in the water. A child's face, mouth open, eyes wide, as if calling from beneath. And next to it, 4 blurry shapes watching from the dock. 2 adults. 2 children, one of them with his arm outstretched, pointing. Amanda tore it up dock, but sometimes, in her dreams, the lake speaks. Not with words, but through mirrors. Her reflection no longer matches. It lingers a second too long. And always behind it, just beneath the surface, Ethan's hand rising slowly through the water, reaching for the light. And she knows. He never really left.